Hello everyone. Today's topic is the Merovingians. That really long word is simply a name for a dynasty of the rulers of the people called the Franks, who are eventually going to found France. And this is about 500 AD. The kingdom of the Franks is pretty much over the place that we think of as being modern France at this time, but it also extends out over a good part of Germany and across the Rhine into eventually what becomes Bavaria down here. It's a large empire, and it becomes particularly powerful starting in the 6th century, starting in the 500s, because the kings of the Franks converted to Roman Catholic Christianity. So I want to talk about that. And to do that, we have to go back to the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, which we talked briefly about when we talked about Constantine. What was going on at the Council of Nicaea was a theological point that probably doesn't mean anything to us in the 21st century, but which was very hotly argued in the 4th century. The question was what the relationship was between Jesus and God. The group that would eventually become Roman Catholics argued that Jesus was equal to God, and in fact that Jesus was God. This is the best foundation of what becomes eventually the Holy Trinity. But the Arians, followers of a priest called Arius, argued that Jesus was subordinate to God. Both sides had lots of scripture on their side. The Bible isn't super consistent over this question. But eventually, after a very hotly argued couple of days, the Arians eventually lost, and the Catholics wrote the Nicene Creed. Now, the only thing that I really need you to understand here is that both sides sent out missionaries once the Council of Nicaea was over. So Roman Catholic missionaries went to convert peoples to become Roman Catholic, and Arians sent missionaries to convert people to Arianism. Most of the people who became Arian at this point were those Germanic groups that were pushing their way into the former Roman Empire. So when the question came up about who was going to be the dominant royal dynasty in Western Europe after the fall of Rome in 476, one of the things you'll notice about these three groups is that they are Arian Christians first. That is, they can't join forces with the Pope because they are not Roman Catholic. So we have a group called the Visigoths. They are in Spain. They started as Arians, didn't become Orthodox or Roman Catholic Christians until a king called Recared, who died in 601. And as we're going to talk about later, the Visigothic kingdom in Spain was conquered from North Africa by Muslim forces in 711. So they were not going to become the dominant dynasty of Western Europe. The second group is the Ostrogoths, and you might remember they were in rule in Italy. They were ruled by Arians but tolerated Catholics. But they were overrun in 568 by a group called the Lombards, who were still Arian Christians at that point. That area in Italy was also reconquered by Justinian temporarily in the middle of the 6th century. And the last ones are the Lombards here. They were Arian Christians until the 600s. They were not independent of the Franks after a certain period of time. They converted to Orthodox or Roman Catholic religion under a king called Luitprand. One of the things you're going to get to know this semester is lots and lots of awesome names that you can name your children one day. Our document that we're going to discuss in class is a document by a guy named Bishop Gregory of Tours. You can see he died in 595. He wrote a great big book called History of the Franks as he served as Bishop of Tours. And the story of his that we're going to read is about a king called Clovis who died in 511. And as you will see, Clovis becomes a larger-than-life character in the way that Gregory tells his story. I'm going to skip past some images here because I'd like for us to talk about them in class. Right. Now, Clovis, once he became a Roman Catholic and once he began to conquer the various Frankish and non-Frankish tribes around him, he began to feel that it was incumbent upon him to declare himself king of all these places. Now, chieftain was really his title. He was not a king, but he felt that he could build a dynasty and form an empire. Once he had extended his power as far as it was going to go, and we saw the map just a few minutes ago, he sent a letter to the Byzantine emperor telling him that he was the most important king in the western part of the empire, and offering a peace treaty. Now, this was a very strange thing for him to do. He didn't have to do that at all. He could just sit and be king of the Franks and completely ignore the Greeks. But the Byzantine emperor replied with something very interesting. The Byzantine emperor sent him back another letter naming him consul of the Western Empire. And this was a huge deal to Clovis. It was as though the Roman Empire was reborn because he had the ancient Roman title of consul. It meant just about nothing in terms of the difference between his power before and after being named consul. He was very excited. When he coined coinage, it was still Roman coinage. It has the head of the Byzantine emperor on it instead of his own head. And he collected taxes based on the old Roman tax system. So the tax system was still in place, so he revivified it, made it work again, and begins to collect taxes as though he's a Roman. So with these kind of Roman, it's almost like Clovis goes through life wearing a Roman costume. So these Roman costumes allow him to conquer other groups and to claim that he has the divine right to rule over the other Frankish folks because of his descent from Merovingian, who's a traditional god of the Franks. So here is a guy who is doing many of the things that ancient Roman emperors did by declaring himself related to one of the traditional gods of the Franks. What he doesn't have at that point is a legitimacy to allow him to argue that he has religious support for forming a kingdom instead of a chiefdom. And so that is what happens when he converts. He gets the legitimacy that he needs to form a kingdom instead of a chiefdom. After that, he and his descendants will extend their territory into a very large empire, and eventually Charlemagne will come along and make that empire even bigger. I'm going to click past those images for now. Right. So the descendants of Clovis are called the Merovingians. They're called Merovingians because they are descended from Merovec, the Frankish god. So the other thing that I need to explain is the inheritance that breaks up the empire of Clovis into 4 parts. So if you were a Roman in the 6th century, you gave everything that you had in your will to your oldest son. This is called primogenitive inheritance. You can see the word here. Primogenitive, so primo means first, genitive means generated or born. But the Franks practiced something called partitive inheritance. So Clovis had 4 sons, and in partitive inheritance, you give each son an equal share. So the empire was divided up into 4 areas: Burgundy, Aquitaine, Austrasia, and Neustria. It's not important for you to know the names of these things, and I would never make you find them on a map, but I need you to know that it was divided up into 4 things. These different kingdoms intermarried with one another They intermarried with peoples that they had conquered. They intermarried with peoples that they had negotiations with. So Visigothic and Lombard princesses were brought into these royal lines. Gradually, the state becomes what we call personalized. So instead of being a Roman-based state, which Clovis is at least trying to make his kingdom look like it's a Roman-based state, the state becomes personalized around the character of the king. So very gradually, the descendants of Clovis become a little bit like the Byzantine Empire, is highly ritualized. And the person of the king becomes central to the government of the state. Okay, so here's a map that shows you the 4 ways in which the Frankish part of the kingdom was divided up. So we've got Aquitaine, got Neustria, I forget which section this is up here. This is all divided up among the sons of Clovis. And this is what the empire of Clovis was when he died in 511. The Franks were a very skilled people at gold work, so I thought I would show you a couple of pieces of jewelry. You can see this magnificent ring up here with a cross on it, probably belonging to an upper-class churchman of some type. The little birds that you see to the right are cloak clips, so you would put those on your shoulders to hold your mantle in place. Those were very popular in Frankish areas. Those are particularly pretty ones with garnets set into them. And then at the bottom, this really amazing brooch. All 3 of these, I guess all 4 of these pieces belong to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York.